Hello and welcome, you guys. Welcome. So this is Autistic Science Person from Twitter. I wanted to have them on for an interview to just chat about, what it means to be autistic, as well as ADHD, because I've learned so much over the past, like, I don't know, 6 to 9 months now that it just so much that like I never knew, and it's interesting because of how I'm in the mental health field, and so not knowing that, I guess, has just been kind of unfathomable almost, in the way that, like, how did we do it so wrong, I guess. But regardless, I'm super excited to talk with you and get the chance to hear someone with a little bit better way of explaining these things, since I'm still learning, so that we can learn more about what it actually means to be actually autistic. All right. Um, do you want to try to speak? Can we hear you? Okay, guys, can you hear her? Or can you hear them?
It looks like captions are working. I don't know if you can hear me though.
Chat, let us know if you can hear. They're a tad quiet.
Yeah, this microphone's quiet. Is this any better? Okay, I can try to turn it up a little bit.
I think we're good now. Okay, cool. Sweet, perfect, awesome. Yay! Well, welcome to, I guess, maybe my second official Hub conversations. And really, my goal with all of this was to create a space to talk about things that normally aren't as readily available, maybe. So yeah, uh, tell us about yourself. How are you feeling today?
I'm just really tired, so I'm kind of on standby mode. Sorry.
No, you're totally
uh,
fine.
I've just been like totally quiet this whole time. I'm doing okay. Yeah, I'm an autistic person. I'm in grad school just perpetually, so um, yeah, I've been pretty a little busy with all the like Stop the Shock organizing stuff, but other than that, like same old, same old.
Sure, right. I know that you've been in school for a while. You said you weren't sure what even was next with that, but so one of my, I guess, I didn't know if I wanted to ask this first, but maybe I will. One of my biggest questions, I think, for you is, when did you start, like, talking publicly with the amount of vulnerability that you talk about with being
So
autistic?
I mean, so I like generally like growing up I would like write and stuff. Like writing was always like part of what I did to like process things. Like not all the time, sometimes I would play music or whatever. But like I wrote like a lot of poetry and stuff in like 7th and 8th grade when it was like when my mental health was probably like the worst it was. But yeah, so what happened was is like I thought I might be autistic. I saw a video about autism and there were like these experiments they would do and they were like this is what the answer would be for autistic people and I was like, "Oh, well that's what I picked. Isn't that right?" so so like that started like kind of the whole thing and then I ended up writing just by my on my own for maybe like a month or two just like about like autism stuff, like rethinking about you know different kind of traits that I've had and all that stuff. And so I already kind of that is kind of what my blog ended up being. So I wrote a bunch of stuff that I never even published a lot, like especially my early thoughts, because I like had no idea what I was, really trying to get at. Like I didn't know any autistic people. I didn't really know much about anything. I was just writing about myself, and I was like, well, maybe this is a trait, and or just like writing about experiences and stuff. So I have a lot of like old um, like journaling kind of stuff that I wrote. And then when I saw, I think it was Kieran's blog. Kieran Rose has a blog called The Autistic Advocate, and I don't remember if I think I read his blog before I went to Twitter, and it was about masking. And so I immediately, at the time, I was watching Westworld, and it freaked me out. Like, I couldn't watch it. Like, any reality bending show would, like, my brain like broke. Like I literally like I was like this freaks me the hell out. Like I'd have like nightmares and stuff. Like not necessarily related to the show, but like that kind of thing gave me nightmares. And I never knew why. Like it just freaked me out. And so after reading like Kieran's like post on masking and stuff, I was like, oh, it's cuz like I literally like thought I was an alien as a child. Like yeah, that's going to like so anyway, so like that's what my first post was about, was like probably the most vulnerable thing that I've written about. Like I actually asked my parents like not to read that post because it was like I've literally never told anyone that information, but I just felt like I'm sure other people, like after reading Kieran's post, I was like, I'm sure I didn't even actually think other people felt that way at first, but I was like, maybe other people have. So if I put this out here, I'm like, maybe no one's going to even read it, blah, blah. You know, like I didn't expect any feedback or anything. And I got like 5 comments on that being like, oh yeah, I thought I was an alien too. I was like, what? So I didn't like, I never thought people were actually going to read what I wrote, to be honest. I thought, oh, and there's another blog called, what was it? I think it was called like the something lady. And it was about an autistic woman and her daughter. And I don't think that blog is up anymore. But I actually I just emailed her one time and I was like, should I write about this? And she was like, go for it. So that actually like pushed me to write about it. Otherwise I would never have written, like actually posted anything publicly. But I saw that person's blog and I was like, oh, maybe I can actually write about this, because it was like a casual, it wasn't like a formal blog or anything. Like it was just kind of like day-to-day stuff. And it was really, oh, sorry, is that really loud? Oh, okay. Yeah, so Jen is just like setting up sound stuff right now. But yeah, I think that was all I was gonna say.
Well, that's really neat. It's interesting because I guess it's just interesting how I guess like legitimately alienating it feels. Um, it makes you literally feel like an alien. Um, if you get a chance, haven't already, could you perhaps ask about their journey to getting a diagnosis as being on the spectrum? And I know that in the UK, it's very difficult. So that was one of the viewer questions, and the reason I read it out loud was because that's kind of my next question. Just what what did your journey look like? Well, I guess to kind of expand with that. Maybe I
Yeah,
asked
sure.
about the blog a little bit too early.
Oh, that's fine. So to get a diagnosis in well, I'm in the U.S., so I'm not in the U.K., so I can't really speak to that. But I have heard that the waiting lists are pretty long in the U.K., and also that some people in the U.K. have trouble getting a referral. So it's really similar in the U.S. in that sense, because sometimes you'll have to go through your GP, like your primary care physician, and general physicians here have like told people, oh well, you don't look autistic, so I'm not going to refer you. So that's like always a huge barrier. I'm lucky in that like I have relatively good like healthcare, but again, like adult diagnosis isn't covered by insurance or anything. I had kind of a weird hybrid, like not super, I didn't have like all the assessments or whatever that sometimes you have because it costs a lot of money. So I actually had like an interview with someone who had worked with autistic people before. At the time, I wasn't out as non-binary, but I probably would have done this anyway, just because like people don't advertise that they work with like non-binary people. So I probably would have still, even like, I did this at the time, but I even today, if I had to get a diagnosis, I'd probably do this too, is look for professionals who've worked with autistic cis women before, basically, because otherwise they'll probably just be like, oh well, you don't look autistic or whatever. But I was lucky, I found like a women's counseling center for some reason that had a person there who was like really knowledgeable and was like really validating and stuff. And honestly, it was like a lottery, like I just got lucky. And I honestly think that that person was probably neurodivergent, like the person who diagnosed me. And they even gave me like an ASAN like pamphlet at the end, like, and was like, yeah, a lot of adults come to me and they know more than me usually, and they already know they're autistic, and they just kind of want like an official thing that, that is validating. Because for 6 months, I thought I was a hypochondriac. Oh, I just have anxiety. It's not really. And I did like a ton of research, like an absurd amount of research, like hyper focusing on autism for like months. And I'm sitting there going, yeah, I think it might just be anxiety because people think I'm a hypochondriac, and I'm not really autistic because I don't act like X, Y, and Z or whatever. And it's like, yeah, that's not how it works. But for me, like, I realized after I got diagnosed that like for me, it didn't really make a difference. Like the main reason, but it validated me, because at the time I didn't like really think I was like could be really autistic, right? Because it's all like the functioning label bullcrap. Um, but yeah, so basically, now when I look back on it, I'm like, it was just like a piece of paper, and someone listened to me and was like, "Yeah, you're autistic." It's like it's actually not super meaningful for me anymore, but like at the time it was, because I was just really anxious that I was kind of like making it up or whatever. Um, but yeah, so I feel like other reasons to get a diagnosis would be like for work accommodations. And the other thing I want to do is like actually like do like participate in research and stuff for like qualitative surveys. So that's another reason why I wanted it. Um, and then the other accommodation would be like as a student. So I had already taken all of my classes as a grad student right before I got diagnosed, basically. And so in the interview, she was like, so your school's probably not going to have anything for you to like accommodate you because you already taken classes. And I think she was like, right. Like, I don't like, I work on like disability stuff at my university, and like there's not really anything for like grad students aside from classes, right? Like it's focused on classes, focused on undergrad. There's very little they really do for like research kind of stuff. So
That's
yeah.
interesting. That's interesting. Because I empathized because I got diagnosed with ADHD my senior year of my bachelor's, and it was kind of like, well, guess I don't need the accommodations. Kind of didn't necessarily maybe need them in the first place. However, I didn't even think about grad school from that perspective and what kind of supports you get in that way. So that's really interesting. Also, thank you for sharing about the like just kind of, I guess, therapist lottery, because yesterday I got to have therapy for the first time since March. Same therapist, but she went on maternity leave, and I came in so hot and was talking about all the things. But at one point I was like, okay, please turn your potentially, like, I was like, turn your mindful brain extra on right now and listen with curiosity and no judgment at all. Would you think I could be autistic? And she listened curiously very well, and turns out that she is not as competent on autism as those who like do diagnose. And that was cool for two reasons, because one, that means she's not trying to diagnose something she doesn't understand, and then two, she kind of almost has like, I don't want to say like a clean palate, but like she's not too tainted by a lot of the misinformation. And
Yeah.
so instead, when I was sharing all of these different things and seeing how, like, oh, I, how did I get through school? Why, I was a teacher's pet because that was the only way that I could, like, try to not make disruption. No, I would get praise that way. That's the only, kind of way it
Yep.
seemed like I was able to get praise. And I noticed she would, like, take notes when I would point out small little things that we were like, oh yeah, that that does kind of fall in line with kind of what we're suggesting based on all of the diagnostic stuff anyway. So that was cool, and I feel like I as well got lucky with my therapist, and she was like, so what would the diagnosis like help you with? And for me, I think that, like you said, like school and work accommodations, whether I go back to school or not, but definitely for work. Now, who knows what kind of accommodations are needed? Because the first time I ever tried to get an accommodation at a job, I ended up sitting in my psychiatrist's office and we were kind of like, I just remember her saying, so it sounds like you're saying you think you should quit because there's almost not an accommodation to make it something that you can do. And so I think that that makes me a little bit nervous because of how rigid, like, jobs are, even if you have an accommodation, because it's not helpful for them, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for sharing that. I don't know if I don't know if you included this or mentioned this, and I know you were talking about feeling like an alien, but was there ever a point where you kind of felt a certain ways about the diagnosis in terms of like, this isn't what I thought it to be? And like I said, you may have mentioned that already, but my brain didn't pick it out.
I'm not sure, but I did want to touch on one thing. So the other reason I wanted a diagnosis is because I didn't feel like I could tell people I was autistic. Like if I needed to, right? And
That too, yeah.
I had at least 2 or 3 shutdowns during grad school, like during like classes and stuff, where the professors just did everything wrong because they because they didn't understand that I couldn't talk. Like that was a huge issue. Like literally someone thought that one of my family members had died because I couldn't talk and like look at them. And I literally wanted, like in my head I'm like, I can't tell them I'm autistic because like I don't have a diagnosis, like what, I'm not, like they won't, and also they won't understand it, like I like either way. But it was also like one of those things where it's like I really wish I could explain this to them, but it's also, even with or without a diagnosis, like if I say I'm autistic, then it's like all of these assumptions will jump into their brain, and then I'm like, well, do I want that? Like, is that actually going to help me? And most of the time, unfortunately, like it's probably not going to help me. So like I don't even know if I might not have even said anything even if I had a diagnosis at the time. But it's just like what you were talking about with your therapist. It's the same thing as like, it's almost like professionals need to just unlearn. Like it's actually just, the problem is they're taught the wrong things, and then they're like, these things must be right. And if you, and like good therapists and good professionals will like listen to the autistic community and like, like at least like listen to us and like think about it, right? Whereas like there's some professionals like, this is what the textbooks, this is what all these people told me, and every time I'm like, well, were those people autistic? Because they never are. They're never they're never autistic. There's actually a speech and language therapist who's teaching like a class to speech and language students now, who actually has like have them read autistic blogs and articles and stuff, and I'm going to be on a panel like for that class, and it's like that's huge to me. I'm like, yeah, of course I'll do that, because it's like having like 20 people who understand what, like how autistic people exist and like are, and like they're not like one type of person. Like it's like that's like a huge game changer.
I fully agree. That's just also interesting, and people in the chat are definitely, I think, empathizing. Mrs. Rev, I'll get to your question in a moment. One of the things that you had said was, man, hold on. Let me see if I can get it back. It's not coming back. However, oh, well, one of the things to mention is that what was neat was at the end of my session, my therapist was like, if you have any actually autistic voices that you follow on Instagram, like, please send me their names. And I also really appreciated that because she's ready to listen. Oh, I remembered what I was gonna ask. I guess if you feel like expanding a little bit on like the like digging a little bit deeper, what happened to make research on autistic people so wrong and inaccurate?
I mean, we were never like a part of research, right? Like, and it happens with a lot of different like disabilities in research. Like, and I think more recently now, it's even like for a lot of other completely different disabilities, it's getting more common to like meet the people who you're trying to help and like listen to the community and get feedback. And I feel like with autism, it's just even further behind than that because there's all these assumptions about like autistic people being able to communicate or and also the other thing is like the whole theory of mind thing, right? It's like, oh well, they don't understand or they can't understand other people's views or if they can't speak then they must have a low IQ because that was a huge thing. It still is a huge thing. So there's all these assumptions and yeah, there's just all these assumptions and they get taught. I mean, I was helping give feedback on someone's paper they're writing for and they're doing like interesting work and stuff. But their first introduction paragraph for their research is like, people with autism have communication deficits, list Simon Baron Cohen, list blah blah blah, and like just very pathological. And that's like the good research. They still have those like paragraphs of like, here's what's wrong. Because to get funding, right, people have to say, this is a really important issue. This needs to be helped. This needs to be fixed. And so like to say like nothing's wrong with autistic people is to say like, well, you're not going to get that grant. like like there's been people who are pro neurodiversity who've tried to publish with identity first language and the editors changed everything to person first language without even asking the researcher. Like it's even like higher up than just the researchers understanding it. It's like the whole system is like relying on autism being a deficit and being something wrong. And the other problem is with theory of mind, all of those tests, all those surveys like the EQ is all like what would neurotypical people do? That's the correct answer, right? We're not going to get it right because we're not neurotypical. Why would I say like a person looking away is not listening to me when I look away and I'm listening completely? I can hear everything and the like lights above me or, like it just the whole like it's just totally wrong. Like everything about it is wrong.
Yes, I fully, all of it. Thank you. Thank you for elaborating on it. Because again, that's all new information to me. And also, welcome raiders. We got a raid from Buck Fitches, so they're joining us. We are here with Autistic Science Person, and we are discussing what it means to be actually autistic. So welcome in, my friends. I wanna I wanna make sure that I don't like we don't run out of time. So so how about I'm stuck between questions. Okay. How have you found Twitter to be helpful to you? In terms of kind of who you are and like at solidifying, I think, like your activism and just the sheer amount of actually autistic voices that you have found, but then also recognizing how many like negative people there are as well. How has Twitter helped you?
Yeah, I mean Twitter's been literally like the only way to find autistic people, I feel like. There are some Facebook groups, but I don't think it's the same like common. It's so much easier to find like common experiences on Twitter and kind of sift through other people's experiences and even find autistic people who don't have your experiences, right? Because like I always talk about sensory sensitivities and hyperacusis, and there's plenty of people who have like hyposensitivities and like just people who like, you know, don't think the same way that I do, who are also autistic and like have different stuff, like different traits going on. Um, but yeah, it's like really nice, especially like the Asking Autistics hashtag, um, which I think was made by NeuroRebel. And it's just nice to like see that like your experience isn't the only experience, that like, oh yeah, other people have experienced this. And it's a lot more of like experiencing societal pressure of being autistic and like how you're perceived as being autistic, more than like, oh well, I mean, I don't know. A lot of people have auditory sensitivity too, which was nice to know as well. I'm like, oh yeah, and every time I post about auditory sensitivity, I get comments of like, wait, people can't hear electricity? I thought everyone could hear electricity. And there's always like, or if I ever post about hyperacusis, they're like, I finally have a name for why like sounds hurt my ears. Like every time. If I just only posted about that, I think I'd get a comment about every day or two at least. So it's nice to like be able to give other people like names for things, and also to know like, yeah, that's just like how your brain processes stuff and not everyone processes it the same way. And when you're on like autistic Twitter, it's like, oh yeah, my brain is actually pretty similar to a lot of other people. It's like not just me.
I fully agree with that, and I feel like I've had kind of the same experience with Twitch in terms of like, you know, seeing kind of just real life ways of being that aren't wrong and don't need treated, yet we have, you know, so many different things and issues. You had said something that made me say, okay, how can I ask this next thing as a question versus just be like, can you talk about? But I don't know if you've tweeted about this or if there's been others, but what are your thoughts, I guess, on how with autistic people have a lot of like emotional problems, and I at least, so this was one of the things I said yesterday in therapy. I was like, do you think I would have depression and anxiety had we known I was autistic? And like another light bulb for her. She, like, I think she started reflecting on who all she's been seeing. So what are your, I guess, like, what are some thoughts that you have about that, and like how
Yeah, sure.
maybe just misdiagnosis and what we understand?
So I actually, in my second year of grad school, I was considering going to see a therapist for anxiety. Luckily, I was too anxious to go see a therapist because I feared, and I still to this day I believe that like if I had gone to see a therapist for anxiety, I would have left that with like a generalized anxiety diagnosis. I would never have gotten knowledge that I'm autistic. And I think a lot of people are diagnosed with anxiety with like no real like probing into like why that person's anxious. I think there are a lot of autistic people, especially like people who aren't like white cis men basically, who probably are autistic and they have an anxiety disorder. Like, and they might have both, right? But like I agree, I think, well, I wrote a thread about like chronic daily stress and how like just being in environments, especially for people with sensory sensitivities, just like breeds chronic daily stress. Like you have to eat all of your food, you have to shower, you have to brush your teeth. And if you can't do those things, or if like those things are painful for you, you're kind of screwed as a kid. Like it's just like, why can't you do this? Do this thing. Like regardless, like even if your child's diagnosed as autistic, if the parent like doesn't understand, or if the child, like a lot of times I could never explain what was wrong, right? Like I had, yeah, like I had pain with sound, and all I said was like it's too loud. Like that was my, I would just always say like it's too loud. Why is it so loud? But everyone else was like, no, it's not loud. It's fine. What I really meant was like, that really hurts my ears. Stop doing that. Like, I am stressed out. But what they saw was like me complaining about something that wasn't a real problem. And I think that's just like most of your childhood if you're an autistic person. And even if you're supported at home, you have to go to a school. You have to deal with like people like talking to you, like students talking around you, the cafeteria noises, clinking, like smells. Like there's just so many reasons why of course you'd be stressed out. Like if a neurotypical person experienced what we did in one day, they'd be like, that's way too much. Like I can't deal with that.
No, without a doubt. It's just also like I'm probably anxious because those of the people that I was around growing up, I wasn't normal to them, and so now I had to figure out how to be. One of the questions in the chat was, or rather, they said, I've heard that there's a lot of those who are visually impaired and blind getting diagnosed as autistic. I basically am asking what autistic science person thinks of this because a lot of us who are VI or I don't, does that mean blind?
Visually impaired.
Okay, visually impaired have some similar issues with socializing and sensory problems, but it not stemming from the same problem.
That's interesting. I mean, I do know some people who are visually impaired or blind who are autistic. Um, I don't know. I don't know enough probably to answer the question about sensory sensitivities. That would be interesting though. I mean, there's like this whole theory and research that like, you know, if you're blind, then you have better hearing or something, but like that's not super like obviously shown. Like there's like some fMRI research and stuff, but besides that, like it's not like Daredevil or something, you know, like people think like, oh, the sense must be super heightened and like really great. But I mean, I do wonder if that might have anything to do with like having sensory sensitivities. If your sense is like you're not using like part of your brain basically to like use the other sense, like to use vision. But yeah, I don't know. That's actually really interesting.
One of
I
the
don't have.
I didn't finish. I forgot the second thing they had put. They said sometimes I don't know if I'm autistic or if it's just a result of my impairment.
Yeah, I mean, so anyone can have sensory sensitivities and like sensory processing differences. A lot of people with ADHD actually have like auditory processing disorder, like CAPD, which basically just means like it's hard to discern words, especially in noisy environments, or like understand the meaning of the word, right? Like your hearing's fine, it's just like having a hard time processing sound. But there's a lot of people who do have sensory processing differences that are maybe not autistic or they're other some other sort of neurodivergent. But yeah, I wish I had an answer for you. I don't I don't think I have an answer. I'm not sure I can tell you if you're autistic or not.
No, that's okay. The person that asked actually was one of the only people who was like, "Oh my gosh, I follow them on Twitter. I'm definitely gonna be there." So, um, that's cool, and it's okay. It's an interesting, I guess, thought because of it just feels like certain things that I think of, I I experience maybe, well, I don't want to say I experience imposter syndrome, but I feel like when we notice maybe certain things, is there a better word for like imposter syndrome? I guess you were kind of using hypochondriac at the
Yeah,
very
I mean, I
beginning.
think imposter syndrome is reasonable. I definitely had imposter syndrome about whether I was really autistic or not. I think part of it too is internalized ableism because it's like, oh, well, I had these assumptions that this is what autism was, and like I'm over here and like really far away from that, so I can't be autistic. And it's also what other people kind of think autism is, right? Because it's like, well, if I say something, then they're gonna look at me weird, so I must not be autistic because they're telling me I'm very high functioning or whatever.
And to I guess maybe dive into that, why are people moving away from using functioning labels such as high functioning and low functioning, and then just to poke it in there, we don't have to super expand, but to my understanding is Asperger's, because I've had people defend themselves and being like, well, like I have Asperger's, so I'm higher functioning. And it almost
Yeah.
felt like that was kind of like their way of saying I'm not as bad as these other people.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like the same thing I just mentioned. Like, it's internalized ableism of like, well, I'm not the same as that group of people. Um, but yeah, they're not great. I got a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, but in parentheses, it was like would have been Asperger's, right? Like, so there are a lot of professionals that unfortunately still use the label. So there are a lot of people who like may not know like the history of that stuff, and they use the word Asperger's because they don't know anything about the autism community or like the autistic community. Um, so yeah, but generally, like high functioning autism, especially in schools, is still used to like dismiss autistic kids' support needs. They're like, oh, the teacher will say, oh well, they have a really high grade, they get all A's, so they're doing fine in school. When it's like I got like straight A's throughout school, but I was not fine. Like I was like surviving, like I was existing, but
My biggest question, both like, and again, that was another thing with my therapist. My biggest question is, how was I able to get through school well? Like, I was exceeding expectations. And now that I am out of school, and I don't know if it's school related or not, but now that I am out of school or in this new environment and as an adult, whatever, my history has been trash. Like, I can't keep a job, I can't do anything, and I wonder if it's because we just no, I don't have a wonder about it because I don't really know what it is, but it's just really interesting to notice how you can get through school just fine and still be autistic even though that's not, I guess, recognized.
right. Well, I mean, I was not fine. Like that's the problem is that like this is the other big thing, and not everyone has alexithymia, but like I think the most recent data showed that like 50% of autistic people have alexithymia. I think it could be higher, but basically alexithymia is like not being able to or having a hard time recognizing and like labeling your emotions. And honestly, in some ways, I wonder if it's kind of a protective effect. Like, it's unclear whether it's just how your body develops or whatever, and from being autistic, or if it's like people constantly told you that everything was fine when you weren't fine. So you're like, oh, well, I must be fine because everyone's telling me I'm fine, right? But in some ways, I feel like it was protective because I had no idea how anxious and stressed out I was for my entire like schooling at all. And the only time I realized it was when I like started wearing headphones and like, you know, like supporting my own like sensory needs, that I was like, oh, is this what relaxing, like is this what it feels like to not have your muscles like tense like this? Like I'd have my shoulders up like this all the time. I think it was because I was like masking my hyperacusis stuff. I'd make myself like not look at sounds if I heard something in the classroom, and I'd have to like look at like the clock, and I'd be like prepare myself for the bell to go off because it would hurt my ears, and I'll be like, okay, I can't grimace, I can't like, flinch or anything. And so I feel like all of my muscle tension was just like holding that.
Even even things like that. I haven't even like looked into hyperacusis. What
Yep.
what what is that? Just real quickly, is there a difference, or what is that difference between that and misophonia? Because I was thinking,
Yeah, so there's a big difference. So, I mean, yeah. So hyperacusis is like physical, like I get eardrum pain, like physical eardrum pain with loud noises. Some people define it as like discomfort or it being like too loud, like it just feels too loud. So it's kind of depending on what research you're looking at, it's kind of any of those things. I describe it as like physical pain for me. Like it feels like someone stabbing me in the ear. And that's for me mostly volume related. So, yeah, so that's mostly volume related, and then misophonia is more like it can still be frequencies. Like high frequencies are worse for me. Louder high frequencies than lower is definitely worse. And misophonia is like for like really high frequencies that are quieter and like repetitive or like constant. So like pens clicking, people eating and chewing, and like clinking silverware and stuff. it's like it creates like you're just like really angry basically, or like it's like an emotional response rather than like painful. But I don't know. I
Okay,
don't have misophonia, so yeah.
well, see, because the way you talk about certain things with the hyperacusis, like I'm like sitting here like, okay, like, just how you explained how, like, noticing once you were starting, you said supporting your own sensitivities or something like that. That's what made the difference, because it's like, yeah, what would I have felt like going through school? And so I have an issue, like, I guess, with loud noises. Another thing is I've gotten increasingly more sensitive. Even prior to the pandemic, it would seem like I there was one year where I couldn't have my car volume too loud, but I never experienced like the I guess physical pain from it. It was more like my brain went everywhere and doing all of the things. So I
Like
was just curious
sensory
about that.
sensory overload kind of thing.
Say what?
Was it like a sensory overload kind of thing?
Well, see, even then, I'm still trying to learn about what that is for me. Like, so for example, one of the most obvious examples I can think of with this would be one morning, they were mowing the lawn right outside my window, and I was on stream, and I like lost it. I had to mute myself. I like almost couldn't be on camera. I was like covering my ears. And then I put up a YouTube video on misophonia so we could just like watch something instead of me having to talk. But it was, as I've gotten more aware, I don't know if that's increased my sensitivity or if it's just that I'm more aware of it.
Yeah, so that's like a big thing. That's the other thing I wanted to mention actually. So after I learned about it, I was a lot more aware of it, and it's I don't think it's a decreased threshold, but I've heard a lot of autistic people say the same thing, where it's like, yeah, I'm way more aware of it, and like things bother me a lot more. And I actually think it's just because we're not like willpowering through it. And like it's not like basically I feel like my body was trained to like expect it, right? It's almost like chronic pain. And I literally have like foot pain when I walk. Like I have like a dynamic pain disability, and in most of the time it's not as bad as my hyperacusis in terms of pain. Like unless I like really push myself, which I've learned not to do anymore, my hyperacusis pain is way more acute and worse. Which is like it really tells you something. Like I also wrote a blog post on medical consequences with like the gaslighting of sensory sensitivities, because literally there are autistic people who break bones and like like hurt, like, and they're in like serious pain, but like their face doesn't look the same way for a neurotypical person, and they're basically completely gaslighted. And they're also like, well, it doesn't hurt as much as when the lights are buzzing above me, right? Or like when like I have to like look at the sun or something when it's outside, and so they're like, oh well, it must be normal then because everyone's telling me I'm fine. And that has huge like medical, like it's no wonder autistic, I'm sure autistic people have a lot of physical disabilities, because they go for years like being in pain, being like, I don't know if that's pain, it might be pain, and if it is pain, like they're just like, I guess this is fine because everyone else always tells me I'm fine when I'm in like this other pain, like when I have to eat spicy foods, like
Now, spice, that was that. I'm a pickier. My eating pickiness has been interesting. I've never had like a fabric sensitivity, but eating is definitely something I've complained about for as long as I can remember, for multiple reasons. So that's really interesting. I don't. Quickly, I want to ask, just so I know, how much time do you still think that you have in you, just so that I
oh, I
can.
could do like another half hour.
Okay, cool. So I just want to maybe shift gears a little bit and talk about well, I guess both Stop the Shock and ABA, but first maybe some kind of context on like where did ABA come from and why did we think we needed to start treating autistic people?
Okay, well, the second one, I don't have an answer for you
Fair
there.
enough, fair enough. Or maybe
That's a
what led the poor research to lead the people to thinking that. But even then, it I guess that would be an
well,
internalized ableism thought, maybe.
yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't actually know. I mean, if you want to know the origins of ABA, probably read Neurotribes, because it's a pretty heavy read, though. Even I haven't gotten through the entire book because there's a lot of like quack cures and stuff that are talked about. But it's really like in depth about all that stuff. Um, but yeah, this idea that autistic people need to be treated is like just a really big problem. I think honestly, going back to functioning labels, um, they assume that like autistic people who couldn't speak are like they don't have like they just assumed that they had intellectual disability basically, right? And they also and then but the weird part is like ABA, a lot of it is about like trying to convince or like persuade or force non-speaking autistic people to speak, like especially, and they do it really young, like it's like 3 or 4 year olds, and they're trying to get them to speak words. There's even a segment on like Super Nanny that I watched and like did a little analysis of, and there's literally like an ABA therapist that like forces a child off of the swing while he's swinging and goes, say swing, and he starts like crying, and the mom's like, what are you doing? But the ABA therapist is like, oh no, this is just part of the process, it's going to be hard, but he'll be able to talk. And it's like that's more important than like being emotionally okay as like a 4-year-old. Like that's the there's also, I guess the other thing is like autistic people have different developmental trajectories that aren't they've never really been studied like regularly, right? Because all these people are like, oh well, they need interventions like from 2 to 5 years old. They're like immediately get them into interventions and do X, Y, and Z. So we don't even know like how autistic people like naturally develop skills, and it's probably just different than neurotypical people, but they give parents these milestones and they're like, well, if your child doesn't do all these milestones by then you'll need to come in and we can assess your child for all these different things. And so then it's like, oh well, they're behind. Even if they get a diagnosis of autism, it's like, oh well, they're behind on their speech, so we should get ABA therapy happening and speech therapy. And unfortunately, a lot of speech therapy is really ABA based and like reward based, um, rather than like, let's find communication devices for your child to use or different like ways to communicate. Can they point? Can they like look at like pictures and like can they grab your hand and like show you? Like children do all of that stuff. A lot of autistic children do, but it's not considered communication, and that's like a really big problem because they just think, oh well, they have to speak, and if they can't speak, what are they going to do? And parents will spiral and worry about the kids future, and they'll never drive or like get married, and doctors will like tell parents this. Like that's the other thing, like most of the stuff is just based in fear of like what's going to happen when I die, right? And it doesn't help that the US healthcare system is really terrible in terms of long term supporting people who have high support needs, who need 24/7 care. And so that's why, like, that's honestly, I think, the main reason the Judge Rotenberg Center exists, is because parents are convinced that they need to treat their kid and treat autism, even though, again, like, that's not something you treat. It's like treating, like, having blue eyes or whatever, like it doesn't make sense. Like, what are you treating? And they say we treat autism, it's a red flag that like they don't know what they're treating, like they're not treating anything.
No, no doubt, for sure. My mom is a middle school teacher, and I didn't realize she was here, so hi, Mom. But she said, I strongly believe ABA was introduced to make people assimilate into normal society.
Oh yeah, I mean they literally will tell parents like, yeah, you won't even know that he has autism, right? That's what they'll say. You won't even know, like they'll fit in. And it's also all about being able to start like a mainstream school or something like that, right? It's like, well, they'll need to sit still and pay attention, and they'll need to be able to do X, Y, and Z at school. And that's like the biggest motivator, I feel like, for parents, because they're like, well, I don't know what else I'm going to do if my kid can't go to school and I don't have, like, I have to go to work or something.
No, yeah, just it. Yes, all of it. Thank you for sharing that. I want to make sure. I keep saying that I want to make sure we don't run out of time. So, would you like to? We can kind of dive into. So, stop the shock. Does that was I'm not even like totally familiar with exactly in like what situations they're using it for, but does that stem from ABA or is that different?
Yeah, so the Judge Rottenberg Center is so this is where like trigger warnings, content warnings for like abuse, ableism, electric shocks, and ABA plays in here. Basically, the Judge Rottenberg Center uses behavioral modification, which like they literally use ABA, applied behavioral analysis, to like punish autistic people, uh, people with intellectual disabilities, people with like general psychiatric problems, like any sort of behavioral problem, basically, they'll take them. And yeah, so they'll shock them for basically doing almost anything, honestly. Like, there's a survivor who had a TikTok video yesterday who talked about cleaning cream cheese off of the piano. She was like playing the piano for graduation because she just likes to play the piano. And the person who's like in charge of her or whatever like shocked her because she's not supposed to quote manipulate objects. And what that means is like playing with a pen, like you're not supposed to like do this or like any sort of fidgeting. And so she saw her like moving cream cheese off the piano like this, and she thought like, oh, well, you're manipulating an object, you're manipulating the piano, and so they shocked her. Yeah, it's really messed up. And if you want to actually like listen to her, actual words and stuff, her name is Jennifer Misumba, and she's on TikTok and Twitter too, just as her name. But yeah, it's really messed up, and they kind of shock people for anything, and it's basically really similar to a prison with a shock device. Even though they argue that like, oh, we only use it on self-harm and aggressive behaviors, quote unquote, but they definitely do more than that. And they also use restraint. They used restraint on her to like shock her like 5 times in 10 minutes, and they wouldn't tell her when they were shocking her, as if that somehow is helpful when you're doing applied. Like, it doesn't even make sense.
There's
like,
not even any like
makes sense.
Do this for reward or consequence with that.
Yeah, but like they argue that they like time the shocks with like the behavior so that they stop doing the behavior, even if it's just like, standing out of a chair or like not working for 10 minutes or 10 seconds. Yeah, I think it was 10 seconds. Yeah,
I guess.
But,
oh, sorry.
okay.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna explain a bit of the context. So basically, they use a shock device called the GED, and the GED was banned. It's called the Graduated Electronic Decelerator, and this device was banned by the FDA last year, but it was only banned for the purpose of behavior modification. And then this year, like I think a week and a half ago or something, the DC Circuit Court overruled the ban on this device and said the FDA doesn't have the jurisdiction to ban this device just for this purpose. So now we're trying to like push for the FDA to like outright ban the device as opposed to just for behavior modification. But honestly, it was just like overruled on a technicality, like not because it's not torture.
So, I guess we're almost stepping back a little bit, but this might be helpful for those people in here who are maybe, teachers and people who are, just supporting different people in, not so much in the community, but like in settings where I guess autistic people are maybe expected to accomplish some things. So some of the like smaller things about ABA that I noticed or would recognize, for example, setting the student outside of the classroom, sitting at a desk. Maybe they have folders around their desk because they have to write this one sentence before they can do anything else, and then they get half of a piece of candy for it. we see a lot of that, I think, in our schools as well. And at least for me, I never questioned it, I guess, because the goal was to get to the point of productivity, I guess. Um, so I was just wondering if you have maybe some other more like camouflaged examples of the way that we see ABA kind of in
Yeah,
um,
sure.
our
So
daily activities.
this is the other problem, is that applied behavior analysis is only looking at behavior, right? So it's not looking at like the person's internal experiences and what's happening, the person's like mental state, the person's emotional state. Like that doesn't come into account, and a lot of ABA therapists don't really use communication devices. I know of some autistic people who use AAC, and their ABA therapist wouldn't let them have like the word no on their device. So like they literally couldn't say no to doing something. So like if they're tired, if they're hungry and they just can't do this task, or they're like, I'm really hungry, I'd like to, I need to eat or something, that's like it doesn't really, no one cares because it's not about the actual human being with like emotional and like physical needs as a human. It's just about behavior. And the other really big thing that's scary is like a lot of ABA therapists will like try to help toilet train children, and some children have like interoception problems, so they won't realize like they need to go to the bathroom, and they might, accidentally go somewhere else or not be able to go on the bathroom. And so the ABA therapist will just like either like force them to like sit on the bathroom for a really long time, or like, somehow like not reward them because they, have dysregulated bladder, and so like they'll pee somewhere, and so they don't get to have X or Y Z reward when it's like a physical disability. Like they're like plenty of autistic kids with like co-occurring disabilities. Like the other big thing is like a lot of autistic people have trouble writing. They might have dysgraphia, or they'll have like motor planning issues, or they'll have hypermobility, and so it might be painful to hold a pencil. And so they'll be like asked to write stuff when they can't, and if they can't, then they don't get the reward. So like even if it's all rewards based, all that means is like you're punishing them in a different way. You're punishing them in that they don't get to play outside because they didn't write a sentence. And a lot of it's not based on like what the autistic person can do or anything. It's just based on like the goals. This is the biggest problem with ABA. It's based on the goals of the ABA therapist and the parents. Not it like the autistic person does not have autonomy over what they're doing. They can't, there's no consent. There's no like, can you stop doing hand, like they'll do hand over hand without consent of like even asking the child. They'll just move the child's hand so that they do the task, quote unquote, even if they like can't do the task or they don't want to do the task. So it's just like you're not like like it's not, that's not how people work. You can't just do that, because I feel like if it worked really well and it was healthy, we'd be doing it to like non-disabled people, but that's not what's happening.
So I guess maybe we're talking about a lot of the negatives, and obviously I know that there's not a ton of like, solution or resolution to a lot of this, but what, so for maybe like someone who says, but if they're not meeting certain milestone, like I guess for someone who might be genuinely concerned and they're trying their best to listen, when it's how like how do you know when they maybe need more support versus like wanting or judgment on, laziness or do like just our ways of being. I'm learning, at least for me as an adult, like my way of being isn't conducive to a productive society. And so that's not an excuse for normal people or people who have been sold into the idea that we have to be productive to be worthwhile. But like what are, I guess I'm wondering if you have any like thoughts or advice or just anything on like how we can better support people without, I guess, without us thinking that they are making it up, but also I feel bad because it's like asking like how do we make sure that like, you know, people are functioning if we don't think that they can like advocate for their needs enough, but who says that they can't? So I think that that's where I'm struggling in my brain with the question because I don't want to like word it wrong.
Yeah, so I mean, to me, it's like communication, having alternative communication is really huge for like any autistic person. Like even highly verbal, highly speaking autistic people. Like I emailed my parents in high school because I like couldn't I would like get emotionally overwhelmed by questions, especially about feelings. I'd literally email them, and that's like the only way I could communicate my feelings, and it actually like frustrated them to some extent. Like there were times when it's like, why can't you just talk to us? And then I was like, I don't know. I started like crying and like freaking out. And but like as emailing gave me time to like process it and to figure out what I wanted to say, because like me speaking out loud, most of the time I'm not getting out all of my thoughts, right? I'm getting out like 30, most of the time I'm getting out 30%, and when I'm like not in a good environment. And even when I am in an okay environment, it's just like words are different when I'm typing versus when I'm speaking. Um, but to everyone else, it's like, oh, I'm just like neurotypical people, right? Quote unquote. It really floored my family, I think, when I said, I relate more to autistic people, even people, who aren't speaking, probably more than neurotypical people, because like even though you see me this way, like that's how my brain works. Like my brain works like that. Um, but it's so I guess that was just a functioning label point. I guess my point is that like people can advocate, you just have to figure out how they can advocate, right? Like AAC is really important. Sign language, some people use sign language, some people write or type, and even if they can't, like you could make like a video of yourself talking like when you have time to process stuff, um rather than having an in-person conversation, right? It gives you more time to process. I think that's a really big thing that's not really talked about very much in terms of accommodating someone, because a lot of times people want to have in-person conversations like right away, really quickly, and sometimes that's just not how someone can do it. Like you have to have time. But yeah, what your other question? Your other questions about productivity. Um, I don't know. I think it's a general disability rights issue. Like having disabled people believed about what they can and can't do from their own perspective, like these are my limits, and having that respected, and like having the default way of working like be changed for depending on whoever it is, right? It doesn't even have to be a disability specific thing. It could just be like a more flexible workplace. I mean, if you look at the pandemic, we're having, you know, meetings online now instead of in person. And for me, that was really helpful because I didn't have to hear like people making coffee behind me that was really, really loud. So, like, just being like flexible and like working with like how a person operates is like the most important thing. But I don't like it's not going to scale to like a corporation at this point. So I'm not sure.
No, I hear you. I hear you. But even like, even if, you know, parents of children are listening and they're like, okay, I understand that, you know, there's harmful milestones, but how do I make sure that like my child, and I don't even want to say is to get normal because I don't want us to like, you know, what it, my child, I was going to say, okay, my child being okay, but then at that rate, that would be, okay, well, you're just supposed to ask them.
Right. The idea of like there's a way to be in the world is generally like an abled concept, right?
Okay,
Like
there's that maybe. Maybe that's it. Is that
yeah, like and also there's research showing that I can Anne Mamat wrote about this quite a while ago on Twitter, but there's research showing that like most, and it's not that like autistic people should speak, but like most autistic people, I think like 87% from some study ended up having like was it were speaking by like 10 years old. Like, so most autistic people generally develop speech. It just takes longer than neurotypical people. So, like, the idea that that's wrong is weird because, like, yeah, of course you're not going to, like, develop the same way because you're not neurotypical. Like, I don't know why we're measuring ourselves based on, like, this default standard, which we're literally not, like, we don't have that brain. We have a different brain. And even autistic people have different brains between each other. So, like, the idea that there's a standard and we're just averaging, like, this is the average baby, this is the, like, when they learn to talk and walk, like, there's plenty of variation even within neurotypical people. So, like, it's weird to me that there's this super scare when, you know, it's been 2 months after this milestone and my baby still has an XYZ. It's like, okay, well, they're a different human. Like, sure, you can get like supports and stuff, and if they need supports, like, sure, go to like speech therapy for alternative communication if your child's not speaking. Like, that's really helpful. But like, the idea that they have to do X, Y, and Z by a certain date, like, isn't helpful to anyone. Like, that doesn't help like the parent. It's just freaking them out. And like, I don't like, that's just not how it works. It's not like, that's not how development works. You can't just like force something, you know?
No, yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I know that, like, I know that I have, parents of autistic children that are in my community, and, it's hard for me too because I don't know the answer. I know, like, a lot of us don't know the answer, but for me at least, I feel like it's hard to talk about because I don't want to say, it's okay for your kid to, like, not do these things, but like it is. I think for me, I just don't have enough words to go kind of expand on it. So I appreciate you being able to do that.
Yeah. I want to say the biggest thing for parents who are like new to an autism diagnosis is like learning to regulate their own anxiety about it, because they have to unlearn all this stuff. Just like I had to unlearn a bunch of stuff about autism, right? It's the same thing, but it's actually harder for parents probably because they have all these professionals telling them what autism is and like what they should be doing at all times. And I think a lot of parents have like the right intuition of what they should do, but they're like, but everyone's telling me this and that, and like I should be doing this. And it's like, and as an autistic person, like my advice to most parents is like, if you think like something is wrong, like if you put your child on therapy and like you know that they're upset, like you have the right to take them out. Like it's like you can do that. Like trust your own instinct because you probably know what your child looks like when they're upset or when they're happy or when they're, you know what I mean? Like it's important to like the professionals aren't always right. And most of the time they're not right about autism, unfortunately. Like I wish I could say otherwise.
No, but yeah, it's kind of like it's really listen to your kid, not the provider. Real quick, because I time again, I just don't want to take too long. There was one question in here that I thought was interesting. Let's see, where did it go? Do you find or thoughts on finding talking to lots of people easier than talking to just one person? They ask because their sector of work, which is stand-up comedy, there's a massive amount of fellow performers that are also on the spectrum.
Um, for me, it's like having a one-on-one conversation is easiest. Like doing this isn't scary to me because I'm not like group conversations. If I'm standing in like a group of like 3 or 4 people, that's when it's like harder for me to like chime in because I don't want to interrupt anyone. But I think for stand-up comedy, I think it's a little different because like it might be easier because it's just a monologue, right? Like it's not like you don't have to chime in anywhere. It's like, oh, people are coming to see you, you speak, like then you're done and people are like, "Oh, that was interesting," or they don't like it or whatever, but like it's like a one-way inner like transaction kind of thing. I mean, I guess there's like laughing and applauding and all of that stuff, but I feel like that's different than like standing around or like being even at a conference where there's like a bunch of people around you that you have to interact with, right? So to me, like stand up isn't really like having like a lot of people talking at once. It's just like having a presentation almost.
I think that you saying that just makes me go back to, of course, that's why I thrive streaming here on Twitch. Because I don't have, like, it is my stage. I can speak and be who I am and how I want to be without interruption. And that's a guarantee. So that's cool. Thank you. And he said, that's a brilliant answer. Makes sense and reflects my feelings entirely. And then another person said the physical divide helps as well because, again, you're kind of, separated from them. It's
Yeah.
not a double person conversation. So that's cool. How are you doing on time? Should we start wrapping up?
Yeah, I mean, I can go for like another 10 minutes. I don't know.
No, you're totally fine.
I have something in half an hour, but like it's not. So
No, that's
I'm
okay.
not like in a rush or anything.
No, I totally feel it. Well, I guess I just I'm really grateful that you were able to come here today because at least for me in trying to figure there's so much information that it's hard for me to even form sentences sometimes. And I think I read something else somewhere that was like, well, when you learn so much information and you're talking about it, and you're struggling, it might mean because you don't understand it enough and you need to go and sit with it longer and figure it out more. And I'm like, I'm trying really hard, but then my like impulse and hyperverbal for me to like want to tell everyone everything.
Yeah.
And then if you need more context than I can provide, that's where it gets weird. And so I just appreciate the ability to have you come here and kind of fill in some of those blanks for me, as well as to, again, just have kind of an open conversation to talk about some of the different things that I've been seeing on Twitter and just a lot of the different things that are happening in our world when it comes to autistic people and disabled people. So, do you have any final thoughts? If not, that's totally okay.
Well, I was just gonna mention I have if you want like action items and stuff for Stop the Shock, I have a blog post on it on AutisticSciencePerson.com. I also have a separate page about ABA therapy if you need like resources for talking to people about it. There's like research and stuff showing about how it's not great. And I also have like resources for parents on there that's like on the welcome page. It's like really quick and easy. So, but yeah, I don't know. I really enjoyed this conversation. This was fun. I hope I didn't use too many like confusing words without explaining them because I don't explain words a lot.
No, I think that you did fantastic, and again, I really appreciate it. One of my viewers, I guess, I don't know if you do, but one of my viewers asked if you have any questions for me or potentially like the community, since this, I guess, kind of is your first time on Twitch, at least maybe for an interview. And then another one asked if you use Twitch or if you are going to, or if you've thought about it or anything.
Oh, yeah, no, I haven't thought about using Twitch, unfortunately, but yeah, I don't know. So I forgot the other question. Oh, questions for you. You said you're in the mental health field. Can you like talk about that a little bit? I actually didn't know. Like I don't know your like background and stuff.
Yeah, sure. So, I always wanted to help people. I went to college and got my bachelor's in child, adult, and family services because the school I wanted to go to didn't have social work. So I had this off-brand bachelor's degree title. Didn't know what I wanted to do the entire time. I just, wanted to help people. Hadn't figured it out. Post-college, I got fired from 3 different jobs. Only one of them wasn't in a mental health field. The other 2 were at mental health agencies. I have been, right out of college, I got a job as a behavioral health intervention specialist. And that was not related to the thing I had contacted you about about the daycare that I had worked at, with specifically like doing like 2-man transports and stuff to go to the safe rooms and whatnot. I was a behavioral health intervention specialist. That was full-time for a year. And that was when the accommodation, it was like, oh, there's not exactly an accommodation that will make this not be as taxing as it is on you just because of the way that they operate. And then I was a student athlete mentor. I wanted to go to grad school to do more in higher ed. That didn't end up working for whatever reason. And then I was a peer support specialist at NAMI. When I got hired at NAMI, I was like, finally, they hire people with lived mental illness and I can help people using my mental illness knowledge? This is awesome. And then 90 days later, I got fired. And every single box was checked unacceptable in my 90-day review. And I don't understand how that can be possible. And so
there was no like reasoning at all?
I mean, she made up plenty of excuses, but I only had one warning in my file for that entire 90 days.
What the hell?
So that's like personal problem stuff, I think, with her. But all of that just kind of like compiled into this, well, I can't survive in regular society, so I want to, and around this time I was realizing that I have so much to say that I wanted to like start a podcast, but instead I discovered Twitch and saw the opportunity to like build community. And so less than a month until my 1 year anniversary where I started streaming on Twitch in mental health. I literally came on and the point was breakfast and feelings because we're not good at remembering to eat in the morning. So it's like, if you come here, like check in with yourself, like how are you feeling? I have all of the emotion words, all of the feeling words to choose from. Like I have a whole feeling words mug to be able to identify like how you're actually feeling. And that's kind of the point of it. And I had no idea what I was going into with it. I just knew that I had my peer support training and all of this extra history, and I just kind of went for it. And it has just like blossomed into this place where I've learned that me working on myself radiates to everyone around me, as well as I like to plan and facilitate, and I believe I'm a good facilitator. And so I think that just based on that, that's kind of what has created this community that we have here, where people come in and just kind of like how the chat's been going today, just sharing things, vulnerability. So like your tweet threads and stuff, there's so many people where I'm like, man, I wish you guys used Twitter so that you could have the opportunity more than just like my morning chat to get some of this stuff out. So awesome. It's funny because it's like I don't necessarily have like any super exciting credentials or anything, because on paper I look like I have accomplished things, but then if you like investigate, then you're like, they said you're not, so whatever. But I have like I don't know, I'm still learning basically. The demographics of my Twitch community I think is primarily older than me, and I'm 26. I had no idea about that, and I had wanted to work with, young adults prior to that. So that's, I guess, kind of my story in the quickest nutshell as I could put it. But basically, it's just I talk a lot. I want to tell people all the things. I don't want people to be hurt or sad or upset. I want us to communicate, understand better. I learned about active listening over last summer, and that's been a huge thing that I talk about, because I just talk a lot about the things that I learned that we were kind of taught, but not really taught, because if we really did pay attention to things like certain emotional intelligent traits, then we wouldn't be as productive, because we would notice how bad things are.
Yeah, that's very accurate. Yeah, thanks for that rundown. Like, that's really interesting to me. Like, personally, like, I'm just like I was like not in like any of this stuff until I was diagnosed as I figured out I was autistic, basically. So it's just interesting for me to hear, because for me it's like I feel like I'm living like two different lives sometimes, because I have like online autism stuff, and then I have like the other stuff I'm supposed to be doing. And it's like really hard to juggle. And like I'm at the point where like I'm like, should I just masters out? Like, am I ever gonna finish? You know what I mean? Like, I'm just gonna be like, but like, instead of freaking out about productivity and telling myself that I'm doing terribly, I'm like, oh, well, that's actually an option some people do, and it's not like the end of the world. And I'm not, like it's. I'm not saying I'm gonna master that, but I'm saying like my whole family is very academic, and so to me, it's like everyone in my family is like, oh, well, you could do this way to get a PhD, or you could do this way to get a PhD, and I'm like the other option is like just leaving. Like I'm allowed, but like to my family that doesn't exist. So like I have to make sure it's in my head that like it's okay, because like I feel like I learned a lot of kind of like ableism in terms of productivity growing up. And so for me, that was the biggest thing, especially with disability Twitter, of like, this is okay. Like letting myself be okay instead of having like a huge guilt complex about not doing this, what I should be doing, blah, blah. Like it's just, anyway. So that was like a huge thing for me that I really appreciate disability Twitter for, like telling me that that's okay.
And I think I tweeted this one day and ended up getting a lot more like reactions than I expected, but for me it feels like it's like a literal ability to like let your breath out. Like it is an actual physical relief to see that others are being similar to you and it's not bad in our little, circle, I guess. And in fact, we're awesome people. Like it's not even just not bad, but it's like it's quite the opposite. Like you're still awesome no matter how you're being right now.
Right. I think there's a really big parallel with like the whole this is how your child should develop kind of thing. With like there's like a default, and if you're not the default, it's bad. It's the same thing as like we think of these things as failure, and it's like it doesn't have to be failure. Like that's not like we don't have to treat it as failure or like feel like it's failure, because it's a lot of times it's like it's not, and a lot of times it's like survival or changing interests or whatever. And like in society it's treated as failure, but like you don't have to treat it that way.
Yeah, no, I disability Twitter should overthrow capitalism. I just wanted to share quick. My mom had said, which is, I'm appreciative of this both because it's my mom, but also it is a seventh and eighth grade teacher. But she said, I have to say that as Jen grows and learns, I'm growing and learning too. I'll go into this school year with a whole new mindset. Because I think
awesome.
her class, like she's in a rural school with tons of consolidation, so it's like covers a huge amount of area, and even still in that small school I think at least over 50% of her class has an IEP.
Yeah, that's huge.
So again, just thank you for everything. And Green Rock and I think are the same person potentially.
I've been reading Green Rock's tweets. Yeah, I mean and the chat.
So I really thank you for coming here and talking about this. And I think that it would be fun to do it again as well, just so that we can keep having open dialogue. And then it's not always Twitter threads too, because I know sometimes it's easier for people to listen and rather than read, although it's so weird for me because listening is hard, like without something to follow along with, but at the same time sometimes it's way easier than having to do all the reading. So
Yeah, I've been looking at the captions on the live stream too.
yeah,
It's been
so
helpful.
thank you for being here. Oh no, Dr. Deus, our resident therapist, just got here. Sorry I'm late, he says. Oh man. Okay, well, I guess if you don't have any other thoughts, thank you. Just thank you very much for coming and talking, and I'm excited. And don't forget, guys, I've sent this command a couple of times, but here's the Stop the Shock. You can text, you could message, and then also the Google Doc, and then this is their website. So yeah, I just keep saying thank you.
Cool. I was gonna say something, but then I forgot completely what it was. So.
Oh, dang it. Okay, darn. Well,
I was gonna say thanks because this woke me up. I feel a lot less tired after talking for an hour.
Isn't it like I'm not a morning person, but ever since I started my morning streams, my entire way of living has transformed because I've had
Yeah.
my platform to get it all out in the mornings, I think.
Yeah, it's nice.
So,
Okay.
um, I hope you have a fantastic Saturday.
Yeah, you too.
All right, see you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. See ya.